No, I'm just
We're
saying
on.
if we're silent, do we? Okay, whatever. We'll leave them on.
No, no, of course, leave the camera on. Mark, can you just hear me?
Yeah, I'm here. I downloaded the the PC application, so I'm just trying to log into that.
All right, perfect. So we'll give it 30 more seconds and you should be good to go. Fantastic. Thank you everybody for joining. So Paul, Joe, and Mark are very good friends of mine, and they happen to be working in the video game industry. And it's been something I've been wanting to bring to you since winter 2020. And I'm very happy that we have the opportunity within to do this. And the pandemic kind of threw us off. But big thank you to Int and for LaSalle for the annual conference that allows us to host you and have you here and talk about your backgrounds and give the students the insight that they need and the motivation that they need to keep going, right? So I'm going to start with Joe. I'd like you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background. What is your educational background? What prompted you into the video games industry? Was this something that was a fluke? I know a little bit for Paul, but whatever it is that you can share with us about your past and what led you where you are today would be great.
Yeah. So thanks for having me. Nice to meet everybody, or at least meet everybody. I wouldn't say my path into video games was a fluke, but I first started wanting to do film. I started in animation, and I started animation in the games industry because EA was opening a studio in Montreal, and Paul knows all about that too because we worked together at EA in Montreal when it first opened. But after a while, I had a little passion of mine. I love video games just as a normal thing, and I realized that animation in video games is not the same as animation in film. And I went into level design, and I mean, I can't go on forever. I'm going to let Paul and Mark have a little chance. But basically, I went into level design, then production. I worked at EA for about 7 years, at IDOS for another 7 years, and now I'm in Minsk working on World of Tanks for 4 years and a few months. So I don't want to say.
We have until 12 o'clock, so I'm sure we're not going to go over. By the way.
It's up to you guys. I mean, I can definitely answer some of the questions if they have specific stuff. But basically, I love a good story, and I love video games at the same time. So my passion for animation led me into video games. But I also didn't. I worked a little bit on cinematics, but I also felt like the passion for level design and gameplay and actually interacting with the player was a little better in video games than it was in animation, at least. So I switched into more level design, and eventually why production, I guess it's the question. It's because it allows me to work with all disciplines. I'm very social. I'm not shy. I love working with engineers, with designers, and animators. And, without necessarily being someone that just focuses on his work, I was able to now collaborate with all disciplines, work with all disciplines as a producer, and support all disciplines, which to me was more of a comfort thing within my own personality than a professional thing. I mean, more details if you want, but that's basically the gist of it.
So are you in Minsk until the project is done?
The project is never done, Michelle, because it's been going on for 15 years, man, for almost 15 years. But I didn't join at the beginning of it. It's what they call a free-to-play game. So it's a game in which we release brand new stuff, new content, events every 3 months, every 3 to 6 months. So we're constantly trying to not only update the gameplay, but give the player small bites of chunk of content instead of going with a brand new game every 3 years, which is what I was doing in Montreal. We're trying to kind of I wouldn't say it's like a subscription model, but I'm saying it's instead of have a solid game and then keep giving players something a little new, which I'm sure a lot of your students have been playing when it comes to like World of Warcraft, Dota, League of Legends, all those kind of games that have been going on for so many years. Instead of having a brand new experience, if the experience is solid, what we do is we give players just a little bit more stuff to use and to play with every few months. And I'm not really sure how long I'm staying here, Michelle, because I've been here for 4 years.
When you're done, it's fine.
Yeah, it's not a contract. It's a full-time role. So I came here. The interesting thing about my responsibilities here is that because it's such a distant location to North America and Montreal and Canada and the States, that they're used to making games a little bit differently here. It's a little bit more very structured, I would say.
We're
So
going to
they,
talk about the landscape. We're totally talking about the landscape.
yeah,
I'm very curious to see how it is in different parts of the world,
yeah,
and
yeah,
and the different cultures that
absolutely,
emerge.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Okay. So
again, I
we
don't want
don't
to
know.
keep talking. Yeah, please shift on
Okay.
to someone
No
else,
worry.
and then
No
I'll
worries. Paul,
have to jump in later. Yeah.
go ahead, Paul. Tell us a little bit about you.
Cool. That's very exciting. I'm curious to hear about the different structure of the video game development in at World of Tanks. What's the name of the company? Is it World of Tanks?
It's wargaming.
Gaming.
And they messed
Wargaming.
that
Yeah.
up on the
Sorry.
website. They wrote war
That's my
games.
fault.
It's
Yeah,
war
that's my fault.
gaming.
It's my fault. A lot of things are glitching in my brain.
It's
Times
no
were
problem.
glitching
It's
in my
close.
brain.
War
Names are
gaming
glitching. I don't know
games.
what's going on.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. So yeah. Hi everyone. Good morning. On my side, yeah, a little my backstory. So I went to university I did in CGF. I did pure and applied science. University. I did computer science. There was no option for video games in either of the places. Um, it was also not the top of exactly everything that I was going to do. I was like, like I'll get a job at a company that does software. And at one point, one of my friends, actually, that all the two of the three other speakers that Michelle and Joe both know, Tony Myrano, who said he's like, yeah, come and work at EA. It's great. I'm enjoying it here. I'm loving it here. So I try it out, and I've been in video games ever since. And I've always loved video games, and so it's not a surprise. I've been playing video games for since I was a small kid. Um, so that's the start of it. Basically, I was at Electronic Arts on the Army of Two franchise, and then with a small intermission for another, I don't know, interesting project, which never saw the light of day. Worked on that for a year, and after the 5 years that I spent at Electronic Arts in Montreal, I jumped ship and joined an indie studio called Minority Media, and their games are maybe less well known. There was a little bit of kind of a lot more storytelling and personal stories and stuff like that, which was interesting. And I really enjoyed the dynamic of a small team. There's not many people, but you get a chance to,
How
well, you
many
have
people are
to.
we talking about?
Well, if you're talking about programmers, I think at some point there were 4 programmers. Maybe there were a couple more, but there was never many more than that. And at some points we were 4 programmers on 4 or more projects. So
Oh my
it's
God.
different challenges. It's not exactly the same. Whereas in a bigger studio, you would be like, you are the person who's going to work on audio or this specific part of the gameplay or something like that. So it's a bigger vision on bigger visibility on the project, and it's different and interesting. Was there for 6 years, worked on a variety of things. PS3, like emotional game where we tell the story of like the creative director's relationship with his alcoholic, abusive father. It's not the kind of thing you normally hear in video games. This is like an indie film that festival where you would hear that kind of thing. So it's very different and very interesting. And then as as time passed, we started to do, did some mobile games, did some VR stuff, and that's when I left. That's kind of the direction that they were heading in, and they're still doing that kind of stuff now. They just changed names recently to Meta 4, which is interesting. It was just weeks before Facebook changed names to Meta, so he felt good that him and Mark Zuckerberg are on the same wavelength. After that, I spent a couple years at Warner Brothers, kind of getting used to big studio development again, and for the last 2 years, I've been at Behavior as a programming team lead on Dead by Daylight. So yeah, and But interestingly, kind of like what Joe was mentioning, the Dead by Daylight is another one of the games as a service, another one of the desktop ones. Mobile has had games as a service for a long time, but it's more and more, you're seeing this more and more in desktop games where, you'll have the game be relatively inexpensive initial purchase price, or free, depending. But then you have like a long tail of support for the product, because there's stuff to buy all the way along. So it's interesting that we're seeing. It's been around for a while, but it's interesting to see this more and more with like regular updates, just kind of same as mobile. And so that brings us to today.
Yes. Okay. So Mark is having some technical problems with the camera, but I'm going to jump to you anyway, Mark. So if you could introduce yourself to the audience, and we can try to resolve the camera issues as we go, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, sorry for the technical problems. My name is Marc-Andre Faucher. I've been working in the games industry for about 7 years now. I started out as a gameplay AI programmer. So I entered the industry through a contest. Ubisoft has this yearly contest for people at university that want to participate, try to make games. And so I just tried out with a couple of colleagues, and the game didn't really pan out, but I managed to get an interview and get an internship, and that's how I started out. So I did AI programming for a couple of years. I really liked the interdisciplinary aspect, working with designers, animators to try to realize characters that are fun to interact with. Yeah, so I did that for a couple of years. And then I started to become more specialized, doing more animation programming work. I went into the tool side, working on IK tech, which is inverse kinematics. Basically, it's a bunch of math relating to how to move bones. It's used a lot for like foot contact on the floor. So I did that for a year. Was not too interested in continuing on the tool side. So last couple of months ago, I had a chance to go with an independent company called Raccoon Logic, and yeah, so I'm back making games now. Really small team, so it's a lot more varied. A lot of
How
different things
many?
that need to be done.
How many?
Yeah, so we're about 15 people. 4 of those are programmers.
Wow. And can you disclose a little bit more about the games, or not really? That's
Sure.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the fun things about small companies is there's a lot of less legal hoops to jump through. So the team worked on Journey to the Savage Planet, and we just got the IP back. That game was bought by Google, and less than a year after that, Google decided to jump out of the games industry, and so they released their games programmers, and they started another company, and that's when I joined them.
Okay. Since you're with us right now, I was very curious about the gaming landscape. Joe was saying that things are a little bit different in Minsk. You've been with Ubisoft for quite some time, and now you're with a smaller company. So how would you describe the landscape today in general on the planet, but also in particular with contrasting the companies that you've worked for or that you are working at right now?
Sure. I think there's a lot of opportunities. Like, big companies are just growing and always hiring, and I think that's a good place to at least start out at. Um, um, Big companies are really good at training people that are new to the industry and get people on board. But yeah, in the last couple of months, you may have seen in the news, but there's a lot of small studios also starting out. So yeah, just there's a lot of different opportunities still in the games industry.
So I remember when we were talking about Ubisoft, you told me that the structure is that you're on a project, and then when this project finishes, then you're kind of put in this room, you're doing some research, and depending on what other project is going on, somebody may pick you or you may select a project. And the cool thing about Ubisoft, what I do remember you telling me, is that they did not lay off their developers. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Right. Yeah. So in a lot of industries, such as the games industry or like cinema or any industry that's project based, if your project gets canceled, that generally means that the people stop working at the company. Ubisoft is a big enough company so that they don't really do that. You're put into what's called interproject, which can be between maybe a month and a year. And during that time, you try to find other projects that match your skill set. So that's also a good thing with bigger companies, is that if the funding doesn't falls through, for a small company, that probably means the end of the studio. For a big company, there's generally the risk is more varied. So there's probably different opportunities for you.
Okay. I remember, Paul, we used to talk when we used to be at Concordia and during graduate school. The chatter that we would hear, that's 20 years ago, without revealing anybody's age. The chatter that we used to hear about the video games industry is that the life of developers was insanely difficult, akin to investment bankers who used to sleep under their desks and work crazy hours until the wee hours of the morning. And there was a huge turnaround. Is that still the same? What's the landscape like right now? I know that there was again, without giving explicit names, I remember you went through a rough time like this when you were working with one of the studios, and it was they were pushing hard, very, very, very unsustainably. So, what is it like now? Is there still this element of let's push, let's sprint, let's go fast, let's deliver the project, let's follow the overnights? What's going on?
So I think that well, I do recall the long weeks, let's say, and Joe, you were there at the same time. The long weeks on some of the projects at the company where we worked together, and a few things. I think there's a bit of a. I've heard that there's a generational shift that's been happening lately. So without like so much first-hand information, I heard that there's like projects at Ubisoft, which are, this one is primarily older people, this is primarily younger people. This one, they stay late and they don't mind it because that's what they've been used to. And this one, they don't stay late. They don't do overtime. Don't bother asking them.
They pack the shop at like 5 o'clock.
And that's an interesting kind of shift in yeah, like how people would like to do that. I only did an internship at Ubisoft a long time ago, so maybe Marc-Andre, you have a better visibility into any of those things at that company.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a cultural shift that's happening like at the moment, and the industry is kind of new. Like the Ubisoft, I think, started out in '96. So like the first generation of people that went to work in the games industry, we're kind of going through like the second generation of that. So a lot of people have been there for like 20 years, and then there's like a new batch of people. And so yeah, you definitely get that culture shift. I've been on projects where the level of seniority was a lot older, and people expected you to stay like past 5. If you left before 5, it was kind of it badly reflected on you. And a lot of pressure from managers to do overtime. That was just a couple of years ago, and moved on to another project where just the manager basically went to bat so that people didn't have to do overtime, and the planning reflected that. So just a lot less crunch. And yeah, this new studio that I've been working for, one of the big criteria that I was looking for was people that wanted to plan things in order to not have to do crunch. And that really reflects that cultural shift that you've been talking about.
So we want it to be sustainable, so we don't want to crunch. But how realistic is it when we have project deadlines and when there's a lot of money at play and there are a lot of expectations and there's a lot of pressure? How is it today? Paul?
I think one of the things as a team lead now, one of the things is that make sure that you provide the feedback to the employees that, like, you know, it's good to investigate stuff and take your time to see stuff, but really we also have to actually deliver something. So, you know, not waiting a full year to give someone feedback to say, you know, we really need you to dive in, and you know, your evaluation this year is not good because you didn't dive in. If you can give that information to someone earlier on how to get, you know, into and solving the problems, that's one way to kind of keep a tighter loop on that, and making sure that people can deliver while staying true to, like, not doing overtime. And that's something that behavior tries to do. That's one of the things they pride themselves on, not doing overtime. It does happen, depends on the project. It has happened. People bank overtime, so it's not free overtime. Work an extra 10 hours and we'll pay for your supper. It's not like that. So you know, it means that there's more of an emphasis earlier on to plan, also to keep on top of the scope and to cut things as necessary, scope things down, and be aware of scope creep. So it's a tricky, it's a tricky topic to get right. But there's some tools that we can use to get there.
I'm going to ask you one last question regarding the landscape before I move to Joe. So how's the nature of the projects? Are they fully agile or are they semi-agile? Are we, where are we on that?
I mean, we use, I feel like no company that I've ever worked at uses exactly the agile methodology one for one. Everyone has their own flavor of it, or things that has worked or not worked well or less well in the past. And so those are
adapted.
They make some changes to see how they can make it work better for them. So, but yeah, we're using, you know, scrums and planning, sprint planning, you know, doing it by sprint. We have releases that we plan for, and depending, it maybe less of user stories and stuff like that, but it depends on the feature. You know.
Okay. Joe, you want to tell us a little bit more about the structure and what's going on?
About which part?
Well, we're still talking about the landscape, and I mean, there are different parts to the landscape. So how you were saying in Minsk, it's not totally structured like the way it is in North America.
Yeah. Oh, no. No, it's very structured. That's kind of the problem, is that because it's so structured, you don't leave a lot of room for creativity. But if you want, I can give you like my 2 cents on the whole overtime thing, because it's always been a little strange to me how we don't necessarily know when enough is enough. Paul we did this so many times where we're like, oh, we'll fix this and we'll get an extra 2 Metacritic. Is such bullshit, man. Like, there is no way for us to guarantee that we will get And by the way, for those who don't know, a lot of our bonuses were based on the grades that we got from Metacritic, which is a compilation of reviews from the biggest press of the time. It still is the way today that a lot of developers figure out if a game is a success or not. And with all due respect, a lot of them are just people in their backyard making reviews of their personal feelings about how they feel about a game. So our own bonuses was based on whether or not this one person liked the game or not. And for many times, they weren't necessarily a fan of either the franchise or the genre and all that stuff. So maybe when we started in the industry, I would say we believed in the little things that might have gotten us better grades. But I would say today, after all the years I've worked in the industry, it's very, and I hope a lot of us have now matured to that level where we understand when a change, as much as you're passionate about it or as much as you want to do it, will really give you nothing. The game is beautiful, it's excellent, it's fun, enough, like call it a day and move on to something else. And I'm a producer, man. I should be someone that goes and says to someone like Paul, come on, man, give me those 2 extra hours of work. No, because one thing that I would say, I've kind of, hey, Marc-Andre, welcome to the party, buddy. I also
Never
believe
say
in the
never.
strength of a team and the continuance of that team, from project to project, from game to game, keeping the team intact as much as possible and keeping at least the core team, right? We learn from our mistakes, we learn from each other, we get better. And if you start to think of people on your team as there's someone you can replace, then you lose. And a lot of you guys would have seen this in not only games and movies too, right? When you start to see sequels and the third game in the series and it starts to suck and it starts to get worse, it's because the team is you don't have the team anymore. The people that created the magic of a first game are gone, right? They're not there anymore because you didn't protect them, you didn't value them, and you prefer to push them on one game than to think about long term what could happen if you just, like, for example, pushed a little less, and kind of gotten a more realistic result. Anyway, so
That's a very interesting point. Are you saying that this is a little bit where we are now, and this is where we're headed, and
no,
hopefully,
no,
or
I
this is
think
what
we've
it
learned
used
from
to
that.
be?
Yeah, it used to be. I
Okay,
would say it
all
used to
right.
be. It used to be where, there, and now, to be completely
You
honest,
try
there's
to
so
get
many.
the max out of it.
Not anymore. I would say not anymore. I'd say there's 2
Good.
ways to do games today. It's either you throw more people at it, or, I mean, you outsource is another option. Not outsource the game, but outsource pieces of the game, which we do. Every big company does. Or you do what we're doing, what me and Paul are doing, which is episodic. You say we don't need to release every bit of content we're thinking about in the game. We're going to release a small piece of it. We're going to release the core experience, and then we're going to keep adding. And truth be told, it retains the team more because you're not under this pressure that, oh, we got to go through alpha, beta, gold, and pressure, and we got to fix all the bugs. And we follow a little bit of what Ubisoft is kind of used to doing with their franchises. There's always 2 teams or 3 teams working on one franchise, right? Assassin's Creed, you have one team working on, maybe, for example, Black Flag. Then you got, I don't know, Rogue and whatever the next Assassin's Creeds were going. They're working in parallel, right? So for us, it's the same thing. When we've got content coming out in 3 months, I've also got a team that's going to release content in 6 months and in a year, maybe. So that's one way we kind of also balance out the workload. We're not saying the whole team is focusing on doing the one thing that's going to be gone in 3 years, and then that's it. Thank you, goodbye, good luck with the rest of your life. We're constantly planning what else can we do, how we can improve the game. And I think that's another way. That's why it's popular with both developers and, I would say, gamers. This idea that you can invest as much time as you want in the game. You don't have to buy a game and play it for 3 weeks intense, which you can still do, by the way. And then after, let's say, I don't know, 3 weeks, you're done with the game, you forget it, it's in the garbage bin, and then you move on to the next game. For me, I think it's interesting because you can say you can play World of Tanks, you can play Journey to the Savage Planet, you can play all these different games, and it's not going to be exhausting. There's no end to it. You can just come back to it whenever you want. And I think in terms of a gamer, I'm seeing a lot of shifting towards that landscape, in terms of gaming versus developing.
Okay. Do you, Paul or Mark, is there something you would like to add to what Joe said? Do you have any do you have a different perspective? If you're aligned, I will move to the next question.
Makes a lot of sense to me.
Mark?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. There's definitely a trend towards that sort of long tail kind of game. And that does have impact on how we organize, how we structure our teams and how we structure the workload.
Okay, so let's cater a little bit to the students with respect to opportunities and skills. If we think about professional integration, when I sat with Paul about a year ago, I said, I am teaching video gamers um, a course next semester, and I just wanted to pick your brain a little bit. And he presented me with the Liz England example of the door problem. And that gave me an appreciation for just how many things go into a game. And for those of you who don't know the door problem, you can I can throw it in the chat. But I know all the video gamers, they know every single little thing that happens in the industry. So I was so surprised at just how many people and how many roles go into one project. And we're talking about a huge company, and then we're talking about the little studios. There are just so many roles. So how can the students integrate in these companies, whether it is the indie company, whether it is the startup, whether it is the AAA studio? How can the students integrate as students before having graduated? How can they integrate once they have graduated? We have here at LaSalle we have two paths. We have the programming path and we have the video game path. And Paul and Mark, you've come to the industry, you've landed in the industry from a programming path. I know there's absolutely no video game background there in terms of programming. So what can you give the students, what can you tell the students with respect to the roles and the skills that they need to bring with them? What are you looking for? So go ahead, Paul. Since since the door problem belongs to you, you can start.
Oh, I don't own that at all. I just gave the link.
No, but I know.
Well, I would say that compared to straight up computer science, having a knowledge in actual game topics is super useful. When I started, I didn't know what a skeleton was. I didn't know what a rig was. I barely knew what animation was. All these things were things that I had to learn on the job. And so having the knowledge in these kinds of topics allows people to definitely hit the ground running. That's my feeling. On the employer side, that means that there's less time to ramp up someone before they start doing productive work. So that's good. Where
can they land? In what roles? What kind of roles can they land?
You mean which roles are available, or?
Yes, in general. I mean, are we just talking pure development? I mean, what are the different umbrellas? I know Mark started right away in AI. What happens? Do they apply for a role and then they are going to be placed on a project, or can they apply for something particular?
It depends how the companies do this. I would say that bigger companies tend to have a very specific thing that they're hiring for, whereas smaller companies might say, we need someone who can do these things, and then also these things, and also these things. Marc-Andre can maybe talk a little bit more about that in his current role. But yeah, there's huge amounts of wide-ranging amount of stuff that can be done in programming.
Before Marc-Andre jumps in, I'm just going to ask you a question, because we get this in the I mean, you look for a job and they list everything under the sun, all these skills that they need. And a lot of people never apply for the job because they feel they don't have half the skills. And then you know that, the job posting is designed to list everything, but they would hire somebody who had half the skills. Is it the same in the industry? In your industry, is this accurate? Will they really not hire somebody who doesn't have something they're asking for and will take on training?
I think that a key important thing is, as was already mentioned in in the chat is to build a portfolio. This is something that is not like programmers are not used to having to build a portfolio. That's something more on the art or design side, animation side. You make sure that you build your portfolio before you, and that's part of you're like, here's my CV and here's my portfolio, because you won't consider me at all. But having examples of games that you've worked on, either that is inside of school or and you can say specifically what you worked on, or game jam that you can say specifically what you worked on, or projects, personal projects, and you can say if it's all me or it's something that, you know, I worked on these parts of it. These are things that are, I would say, crucial more and more to have, like, to transmit like your competencies to the person on the other side.
Sorry, Mark?
Yeah, obviously, having a portfolio kind of proves that you can start a project, but you can push the project to a certain point. And it's so easy now to pick up Unity or pick up Unreal and just start programming a game. Like the barrier to entry is so low that you've really just got no excuse to just throw yourself in there and do something. I think that in terms of what people look for, we do look for people that have like core competencies that can build systems, that can design, that know like the right architectures, the right data structures to use. A lot of things you'll pick up are specific to the games industry, and with some experience you'll be able to figure out. And another thing that we look for is also people that can work with others. Unless you go indie, you find some funding and you do it yourself. Games company are big teams, and you need to be able to work with people that don't have your skill sets, and that don't necessarily speak your language, and sort of bridge the gaps that way. So yeah.
What about languages? I heard you say data structures and I got very excited. What about languages? So
Yeah,
can it be a lateral move? So if somebody is working in C# and somebody else is working in C++, or a student has C# knowledge and then the game is in C++, is the lateral move totally fine? Do they take the student on? Do they just need the algorithmic thinking?
I think languages are pretty easy to pick up. Once you've learned a couple of languages, it might take you like a month or two to sort of pick up the basics, and then like obviously you'll keep on learning afterwards. But I started in the games industry. I had no experience in C++. Started out in C++ and sort of picked it up as I went along. But yeah, in terms of languages that are used, I would say that it's probably like 99% C++, and then some C#. Either if you're using Unity, because Unity, their gameplay code is in C#, and on the tool side as well, C# is getting pretty popular. There might be some web apps in certain pipelines. I've not seen that personally, but yeah, C++ for like game engine code is really, really common, and then C# is getting more and more popular on the tool side.
Okay, thanks. And Joel, so you have a completely different. You're on a different end here.
English is a good language, and then you could also practice with Russian, which is what I'm doing now. Yeah.
So I have, for instance, a student in my AEC class. He comes from level design, and he is here to now learn programming. So can we do can we vice versa? Can we have somebody who's in programming and decide to go into level design? You have a plethora. You've held a plethora of roles. Yeah. You started in QA, and then you moved into character animation, and then you moved into. I mean, I do want to talk about the trajectory. Mm-hmm. Maybe we can just jump in. You've moved into character animation, and then you've moved to level design, and then now you're a producer.
Yeah.
So is this a natural track, or is this your flavor of a track?
I mean, the track to a producer, there's no natural track, I would say, to producers. The one thing I would say is usually whenever you have experience within game development, it's a good track for production. It's not enough to just go to management school or business school or whatever and step into production in video games, because it's a very I can't describe it. I can't describe what a producer does, because I can tell you what I do, but every
Mhm.
company has a different expectations for producers. And just to go back to your question, Michelle, basically it's not difficult to do what I did. It's difficult to do it with a big company, especially these days. I mean, we got to remember when Paul and I were working at EA, the company and the team was 80 people. I remember we shipped Army of Two with 80 people on the team. It was a lot easier, and it was actually encouraged to try your hands at multiple things at the same time. Like, nobody's going to tell you, we don't need that. Today, I would say, that I think it was Paul who was saying, you're very specific in what you're going to do with massive teams. You're going to be the guy who is going to be, animating the left finger of the lead character for the whole production, or you're going to be the guy who's going to be focusing on combat or on puzzles. So um, it's gonna be sorry, Michelle. Who the hell is this?
No worries.
See, this is the problem when you get phone calls from Belarus. You don't know who the hell it is, but especially at 7 o'clock at night. But this person's been calling me 3 times. Anyway, whatever. I don't even know if they can leave messages in Minsk. Can you imagine? We don't have the boîte vocale here. I think it's more like texts or Viber messages. But it's still possible to do. It's very easy to do, I would say, in small companies, because you're encouraged to help out any way you can, because they're trying to keep headcount down. The biggest success about the game is, being able to do something that goes to a wide audience with a very small team. Today, I would say, to compete with the likes of mega franchises like what Ubisoft is doing, you're going to have a very hard time doing that with 80 people on your team. Let's be honest. The quality of the graphics has jumped astronomically since the Xbox 360 days and the PS2 days. So I'm saying, if it's it's a very good question, because I would tell people who aren't sure what areas they want to focus on to first start with smaller companies. Because if you want to go and work for the EA and the Ubisofts, they're going to be very hyper specialized in what they do, not only in each discipline, like there's AI engineers, gameplay engineers, physics engineers, but they're also going to be hyper specialized in the domain that you're in. So if you're a gameplay engineer, maybe you can shift around and become an AI, and I'll let the engineers, confirm that. But jumping in within the engineering field is doable. But then going from being an engineer to an animator is I don't know if that's even possible, right? Going from any discipline to a producer is, I'd say, once you've had enough time in the industry, it's possible, because producers can come from any discipline. But if you're talking about the disciplines of design, of animation, they're so hyper specialized that I don't see how you could potentially do that in a big company these days, because everybody is even more specialized in their own field.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine the shift to, for instance, an animator would require some serious studying or serious practice, much like the shift to a computer scientist would also require serious practice. So, Paul and Marc, is there any insights that you can share with the students? What would make or break an application? Why would I want to hire student A over student B for the same role? The portfolio stands out. Technically, let's say two people are technically equivalent. They have the same mastery of the technical skills, their portfolio, their creativity. Two people are vying for the same position. What would stand out for you?
So obviously, I don't do hiring, but I think the big thing that stands out is the ability to carry a project through. So if you've been working on a project, and it can be a super small project, my portfolio had a bunch of games that I worked on in an OpenGL course at school. They were really tiny games, but they kind of proved that I could start from nothing and build something. It was a bunch of class projects and things like that. And then obviously through the contest, I did a longer term project. That project took 4 months to complete. But yeah, it doesn't need to be something big. It just means that you need to sort of pick up something and carry it through to and yeah, start small. I think a lot of people, their first games, they sort of imagine big ideas, but start small, start with small goals and carry them through, and then you can add things on afterwards. But I think that's the big thing, because like technical skills can be picked up, can be like I mentioned, new languages can be picked up on the job, but the ability to carry something through is really something that is hard to teach.
Paul, what about you? What are the tips and tricks that you can share with the students?
That's a good point. I also don't do hiring, so but I know, for example, we do have a programming test. I don't know if all companies always do, but I've taken many of them in the past. So brush up on it and be ready to do something like that if you're going to be applying as a programmer.
Can we get some? Can we get a couple of examples of questions? I remember, Mark, you had a test too. Did you not sit through a test at some point?
I was lucky. I got through through an internship, and my CV kind of demonstrated that I had some technical skills, and then contacts.
Nobody wants to sit through a test.
Yeah, I don't do tests really well. I'm more of a soft skills person, so like I prefer like talking through problems than having to like find the right answer. But yeah, obviously that's often a barrier, something that you have to go through in the hiring process.
Sorry, Paul, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, indeed, it's a very important point, because once you pass the they pick up the CV. There's like filters all the way through, funnels all the way through, just like for video games. You have to have someone pick up your CV and read your CV, and then you're going to do a programming test, and then you have to the people who go through the programming test will be invited for an interview, and then you'll have to explain technical things and show that you can have good communication with the people that you're working on. And there might be a like whiteboard question where can you do this for me? Like, how would you reverse a string? Like, that's you asked about like typical programming questions. That's a typical kind of not video game centric question, but how would you reverse a string in line? You have like, this is your string, it's an array of characters. How would you switch it? So that could be either something that's inside of the programming test, or that could be something to say like, now we're all working remotely, so stand up at the virtual whiteboard and discuss to me how you would do this, to kind of give an example of how you can think through your problems that are posed to you, and then show your thought process and stuff like that. So in terms of CV, I've looked at a couple of CVs recently for friends, and it was, make sure that all of your qualifications are actually on the front page, because sometimes there's been things where people have like, the languages I know are these, and then on page 2 you're like, I also made a website in JavaScript. Why isn't JavaScript on the first page? So concise, but also have the information there, because the more that you have, especially on that first page, then you're not relying on someone to do a detailed analysis of page 2, line 17, where it's like, oh, it's written in JavaScript, so it's not. Make sure that all the information is there, is presented. Put links to your projects in the CV. Put links to, if you have a GitHub, put that there. People love to go and take a look. You'll be surprised. Going to the next step, there's the programming test. Like I said, often there's a programming test. Not every company does that. Do a bit of studying ahead of time. I'm sure you can look up, 1,001 different programming tests, get some examples, try some stuff out. And yeah, when then you'll have the in-person questions, knowing about the role. If you have some information about qualification on page 1, get like.
I'm going to go through the students' question actually right after this.
Yeah.
As soon as you're done with the tips, we will proceed to questions.
So that's and then having some. I feel more and more there's an emphasis on having some personal projects. Not necessarily personal projects, could be school projects, but to have some projects to show that you've started something, that you're motivated, and that you'll jump in and be excited to, work on stuff. Also, the more that you're familiar with the technology that the company is using, let's say you're applying at a company that does Unity, your only experiences with Unreal, it could be a good idea to try something out and give an example of something in Unity that is more relevant, and that it's also benefit for you that you're learning more stuff, but it's also a benefit for them that when you start, it'll be an easier ramp up. It's something that is a concrete thing people can look for to say, like, well, someone doesn't know technology X, but they know technology Y. It's somewhat transferable, but it'll take more time for them to ramp up and stuff like that.
Thanks. Joe, would you like to add something to that? Is there any tip you would give the students as to what can they use, do to boost their chances to get in?
I'll give them the tip that I did for myself. Don't be afraid to step in through any door. I started in QA, like you said it, right? I love QA. QA was the perfect stepping stone because not only do you get to be a part of the game development anyway, but you also get like to learn from the disciplines directly by being there. So when I was an animator when I first started, but my opportunity first, because EA was literally building itself up. They had no headcount for an animator. So they offered me a QA role, and I thought about it. I'm like, oh man, it's not really what I want to do. I wanted to go in and do animation, blah blah blah. But I'm like, you know what? Why not? And it was a great lesson. So sometimes, especially when you're not necessarily, I mean, if you're going through to be an engineer, that's a completely different ball game. You need a degree, studies, all that kind of stuff, which I think is probably the only discipline that you cannot get into without the proper education. You can be an animator with your own skills. If you learn how to animate in your own time, I guess you can learn how to code as well, but it just feels like some of the engineers that I worked with come from like amazing universities and amazing schools. So animators for me, like I learned how to animate in college after university. I did like a degree in animation. So go through any door that presents itself. Don't be afraid to come in, because going back to the question that I answered before, you can shift. You can shift around, especially if it's not a very academic role. And I'm not saying any of the roles are academic or not, but I know engineering is academic. Like you cannot be an engineer without knowing your stuff, right? But you can be an animator, an artist. You can be an artist by being skilled in your own time, right? And you can shift around. People will notice you a lot more once you're in than if you're trying to get in. And there's a lot of people who have asked me that, should I go in QA? Should I go in through that door? Even production, right? Because your inner leadership skills will be useful even in a QA team. And if your dream is to become a producer, nobody's dream is that. But if you're one of the rare ones that wants to be a producer, the way you assist your team and the way you help your team in any capacity, even stepping into the team for the first time, will be noticeable. Everybody sees what you do, even on big teams. I would say maybe the teams that Ubisoft has, when you're in the thousands, maybe things go unnoticed. But I've been lucky enough that every team that I've worked on, I have noticed, and people have noticed the work that I've done with the team. So I would say if you get an opportunity, take it. Don't wait for the perfect opportunity. There might not be one. Just step in, jump in, go into the water. It's cold, but you'll warm up fast and you'll learn.
Thanks. That's very good advice, actually. And then you can move. I mean, Marc spent some time at Ubisoft, and then he just moved. Opportunities, once you're in the industry, I guess, you're just gonna get the connections that you need, and then you can hop around as you see fit. So, okay, let's
Montreal
jump to
is a
some.
joke for that. Montreal, I mean, we went out once. I don't know if you were there, Paul. We went out to a bar once, and there was someone from every games company in that bar. Like, we were afraid about talking what we were doing between
Oh my God.
colleagues of the same team because there was someone from Ubisoft behind me, someone from Order in front of me, and we're like, it's there are big
It's hard.
developers, small developers in Montreal, and you have an opportunity to move around because, again, like Marc said, if you know someone and they know that you're skilled, they might put in a good word for you, and it's easier for you to go in. But again, developing that reputation within the industry, you get to know people in the industry, they get to know how good you are. And in Montreal, it's so small that even if you go to like a MIGS event, you can get to know developers from all companies, and then who knows where that goes, you know?
Are you coming back? Do you miss the weather? How is it in
I mean,
Minsk,
it's
by
not
the
like
way?
Michelle, I'm not in Hawaii here, man. I'm in like Russia. So it's cold. But I miss Montreal. Yeah, I do. I do
Yeah.
I miss my friends. I miss the Habs. They suck now, but they're going to go back up. But I still
Maybe.
watch the games at 3 o'clock in the morning. But it's just such a, especially when you're in Minsk, to see what the city of Montreal and what Quebec has done with the games industry is just, and again, yesterday Ubisoft announces a studio in Sherbrooke. It's just crazy what's going on in that province, for game developers like your students. I mean, there are tons of opportunities if they just jump in.
Okay, so speaking of students, let's take some questions. I have a few in the chat. So Louis Philippe is asking, what's the prospect for the AEC programming students? So the AEC programming students at LaSalle, they are on a speed track programming course. They start with an introduction to programming class, and they end up with mobile app development and everything in between web. So what is the prospect for an AEC programming student to get an internship or a student job in the summer to get some experience so we can help build our portfolio? Marc, Paul, since you guys are in town.
So I might need some clarification on an AEC programming student.
So that would be the fast track here at LaSalle for students to finish everything under a programming umbrella in 4 semesters. So they learn starting with an introduction to programming course up to they can create mobile apps, passing by databases, internet programming, building web pages. Nariman, yes, Nariman most likely. No, so Nariman is asking, is that for a gaming internship or programming internship? Louis, I would imagine you need to answer the question. Can we give the students the mic? Can we give the students mic access to answer questions? Louis Philippe says either, whether it's a programming or in gaming. I'm going to ask Urum and Camilo and Nariman.
Just raise your hands and we'll give you an access.
Okay, so let's start with that. Thank you, Diptish, for that. So Louis Philippe, you can raise your hand and Urum will gladly give you the mic. Louis Philippe?
Yes, so
okay.
Actually either in gaming or programming. So mainly to get like first-hand experience at a job or something to help build the portfolio itself. Like not start with, I understand that if we do like personal project and stuff, but what is our prospect to maybe help get some first-hand experience at a job?
I would say, yeah, applying. Indeed, so I'm not familiar with the fast track program. The gist is like, yeah, show the things that you're familiar with, and I would say as kind of I mentioned earlier, if you are able to show off that your skills, that's kind of the proof is in the pudding for stuff like that.
I guess Louis Philippe, the question I have for you is, are you interested in the gaming industry per se, or are you just asking in general? Because Nariman is also, of course, she's the internship coordinator, and she's just clarifying on the chat that you can have an internship with other companies. The question is, are you targeting gaming companies in particular? Is that your preference?
Not necessarily in particular. It was more a at-large question, either for, let's say, the program for the gamers. They are already studying in that, so they will have a little bit more experience coming out of college compared to the programmers program. So let's say someone like me who's in the AEC for programming, if eventually I want to go into gaming, I will need a little bit more experience in that. And it is my experience from my personal life where when I was a student like 8 years ago, I used to work for the federal government as a student. And that experience allowed me to possibly get a job at a ministry eventually, because I already had some office experience, I had a security clearance, all that stuff. So it kind of helped me like build a CV and present myself for the interview and stuff.
Okay, it's always very beneficial to have to be surrounded by the right people, by the right connections, to really have a built-up network. If you Jean-Marc, if you want to ask your question directly to the speakers, raise your hand. Otherwise, I think Diptish had his hand raised, so perhaps he will pass before you.
Yeah. So first of all, very good morning.
You can also turn on your camera if that's possible. I don't know if that's possible, so the speakers see who's asking the question.
I would really love to do that, but I have a gaming laptop which unfortunately does not have an inbuilt camera.
Okay.
I usually use my phone to do that. And yeah, so moving on, I'll just ask a question. I had a couple, and since I'm directly talking to the industry experts, so my first one was, it might sound a bit silly, but I've already worked in as a QA for a very short span of time, like 2 months in my last summer when I was not doing anything, sitting idle. So I applied for a QA position and I got it. And the question is, how hard is it for you guys to keep everything in your stomach, like not spill the beans? Like, I'm working on such a big project and not talk to your families about it, or not talking to your friends about it. Like, how hard is it for you? Because as soon as my friends got to know that I'm working as a QA, the first question they would ask, which game is it? And it was so hard to not tell them. And they would come up to me like, you're not my real
We're
friend.
being
You're not
recorded, Diptish. You may
Yeah.
not want to say something you're not
No, I'm
supposed
not.
to say.
No, I'm not saying anything, obviously. So
I think
just
you get
end up
extra cool points for saying that it's unannounced and just saying
Yeah.
that I can't tell you it's unannounced. And they'd be like, "No, you need to tell me."
As soon as
sorry,
you say
sorry.
I'm
You
working on
retain the
something, it's
power.
gonna- as
Yeah,
you
even
say
though-
you're working on
yeah.
it's going to come out like 3 years from now, people stop being interested in it.
Okay. And second of all, do you think that QA is a respectable position in terms of, like, do they consider it as a respectable position in the gaming industry? I don't know if I'm making sense right now.
So QA is a super important role, and there's a huge range within QA as well. The QA people that I work with are amazing, and it would be not possible to do for all of them. There would not be, anyone on the team is not possible to do the job without them. If you can make your way to work in the studio who's making the games, it's gonna be a little maybe nicer to work on than I know keywords. There's big studios that do a lot of testing. You get to work on a large variety of things. You got to have a lot of visibility. There's a lot of in-house knowledge. It you know, you could use that as a launching point to, and I know many people who have done that here at Behavior, who use that as a point of access into the studio, because sometimes keywords will be basically the subcontractor of QA services. And like Joe said, if you do a good job, it's noticed, and people will come and talk to you. And the people that I know who've been hired at Behavior have been hired because they did a great job, and Behavior was like, we want that person, and as Joe said, if you continue to do a great job, like crucial job, that really there's so much that they have. It provides such a great, they have such a great visibility of the game, and they have like a good, they give the details of, like, I walked into this wall and it fell through the world, but also this doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel with the feel right according to the emotions of the design or whatever, like these are all valid feedback to give. And if you want to work in QA as your main thing, there's like so much appreciation for people who do a great job at that. And if you want to use that as a stepping stone for something else, that is something that is commonly done in many studios.
Yeah, do you mind if I jump onto that one, Paul or Marc?
I don't mind at all.
It's funny you asked this question, because it's a very non-industry question to ask. The more people work in games, the more going to know how crucial QA is. And my reaction to that position that was offered to me in the beginning showed my immaturity, because they were like, how about a role in QA? And I was like, oh man, but it's not animation. Today, after all the time that I've worked, I realize how important QA is. And developers, maybe the idea of telling someone you test video games makes them feel, oh, so you don't really make what does making the video game even mean? I mean, teams are so large today that a lot of people will have a difficulty saying exactly what they did on each game. So the team made the game. QA is part of the team. And I'll tell you one thing on World of Tanks, not only is our QA lead one of the most important, crucial, he speaks like it. Like when you hear him talk, this guy, when I first came in, I'm like, who is this guy and why is he talking like he's but he's humble, right? He's extremely humble, but you can tell he's passionate about the game that he's making from almost the first line of gamers, right? He is, most of the time, QA developers are gamers, and the first line to see if the game is positive, negative, fun, not fun, will be your QA. And this guy that I'm talking about, I have so much respect for him, because not only is he so passionate about the game that we're making, even 15 years that he's been here for like a long time, but he's still passionate about the other games that he plays, that he balances versus the game that we're making. So the people that are outside the industry will say, oh, you're testing this video game, you're not making something about the game. But developers themselves will realize how important it is to have a solid QA team, because they're going to be, you look at what's going on with Grand Theft Auto right now, right? Who is testing that game? Because I don't have it yet, but I was just about to buy it. I'm talking about the trilogy, and it's full of bugs. The first people that will tell us what to fix in the game is going to be QA. They're the ones that are going to be neutral, or at least try to remain neutral, telling us what will real gamers really hate in the game that we're shipping. And a lot of times we're going to have to make very difficult decisions at the end of development. What do we fix and what we don't fix? We need a neutral perspective about what is it that you guys believe we should fix. I mean, by guys, I mean QA. So I really want people to, at least from outside the industry, to like break the stigma about what QA does, because at least the developers, we have such respect. That's why I wanted to jump into it, because I love my QA team, and I love the fact that I was once one of them as well, to understand that, and how important it is to have them be an active part of your team, feel like an active part of our team, and not just sit back and feel completely disconnected from the team.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. They are, I mean, go ahead.
Sorry, can I
on
please. Board?
Of course.
Yeah, just obviously, what Joe and Paul said is reflects my opinion as well. Like QA is super important. I just wanted to give some visibility maybe on some of the hybrid roles that are that I'm starting to see appearing. So I think that as we have these big products that, especially the live products, that you have your game that's live, and you need to make sure that it's always stable. So you don't, there's no notion of like you have a product and then at some point you're going to stabilize it to ship it. So you always have this stable product, and QA really is part of that loop. And more we have automated testing pipelines, and so I've seen more and more like hybrid developer QA roles, where the QA are either scripting automated testing, to test the games, basically just giving commands to bots to test the different workflows through the game. We also had a QA developer on the tool side, when I was working at Ubi, and his whole role was to make tools to be able to test our tools. So design corpuses to test the tools. So basically design big data sets that would then be used to test the tools. So it's the role for QA is only going to get bigger and bigger as we go forward.
I mean, it's also a way to streamline the process, right? I mean, Diptish, you just think of yourself, you code something, then you're going to test it yourself. Or if you're following an agile approach, you're going to have an automated test. You're going to have a tester. Would you think that this tester, just because he is not the one developing, he's still writing the test, is he any less important? That QA tester, that's the same thing on in video games. I mean, it's I like the fact that it's the team who built the game. And there are just so many things to do. So you kind of need to divide and conquer, right? Is there anyone who would like to ask any other question to the speakers? Would anyone like to ask anything? Okay, Cole.
Yes, hi. Good morning.
Good morning.
Soon afternoon. So I have a question on like the culture of making games. So there was you guys were talking earlier about crunch times and how it's a lot better than what it used to be. And I see a lot on the websites of, like, for example, Behavior. They kind of advertise how they're trying to better the split between work and like personal life, and they're trying to make it better for people who work there, right? And they also allow a lot more freedom when it comes to personal projects. So I was just wondering how that kind of fares against like burnout, because I don't know if it's still a big issue, but I know a lot of people suffer burnout after working on like the same project for a very long time. So I was just wondering if it's any better than it used to be, or what your thoughts are on that.
When I started, I don't think I knew what the word burnout was. I don't know if there was just not enough visibility on that, or people didn't talk about it or whatever. People just said like, I'm fed up with games, and then they just did something else. So probably there's a little bit more, discussion and openness about awareness. Like awareness about mental health in general, and burnout is one of those things. Maybe it's because when I started, I was like, fresh out of school, and then I could do all the crunch time. You were a young
stud.
Oh, yeah, you could do it.
I'll say young,
nobody can
at
pull
least.
an overnight anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe it's a question of age, but does it still happen? I know people personally who feel that they are, they've taken burnout time at different companies. I don't know yet anyone who's done that at. Oh no, yeah, some people who I've spoken to recently-ish. So it kind of depends on the everyone has their limits of how far they should go, and absolutely sticking to normal working hours is a good way of not surpassing your limits.
We will agree that communication is also very important, right? Between the team lead and the developers, or between the team lead and execs, to just really communicate what can be done by the developer and what is realistic. But this is the long game, right?
Yeah, and that, like, kind of when Joe was touching upon it earlier, the games as a service games that you basically want to keep them going for a long time. You don't want to burn out your team. You want to have like good working conditions, not just for this, but like other projects as well. But this is also one where people will leave your team if they don't see an end to crunching. They don't want to get to the point of burnout, and so they'll leave the team. So you kind of try to have a more structured workday and schedule and process. So I don't know. Does that mean there's less people having burnouts? I think that everyone working from home is a different twist. I think that I've heard some changes to mental health and happiness based on that. That's I think a challenge that people will learn about themselves if they enjoy working from home, or if they need to see people, stuff like that. So yeah.
In fact, Marc-Andre touched upon this, and Paul, you touched upon this, and this was a question I had regarding the landscape that I decided to keep till the end. So where are we headed? Marc said that he's starting to see an emergence of hybrid roles. Paul, you're touching upon remote. So where are we headed in the industry? Is it going to be, are we going back to the office? Will it be a hybrid model? Are we going to have now different roles? Are some roles merging? Are we still required to wear different hats in the smaller companies? Where are we headed in general as an industry? Joe, if you want to jump in, go ahead.
Well, I'd say there's definitely a lot bigger focus from at least the bigger companies on balancing work and life to make sure that we don't, or at least they appear not. I want to be very careful here, because they appear to not have burnouts. I'll say there's still burnouts, because at the end of the day, when you're talking about a creative medium like games, nobody can give you an idea of what it, and this is so funny, man. I'm sure all of you guys, at least developers, have heard this. What does done mean? So we can twist that a lot. Everybody will twist it. So I think that it's very cool, though, that, like, for example, IDOS, my old studio, is doing 4-day weeks. I still think that if they do 4-day, 12-hour days, that's still not addressing the problem. But also being a little bit more responsible about the scope of your game, being able to understand it, and being able to say enough. Like I said earlier when we started, I think we're headed there, because also there is a lot of negative press on developers right now, whether it's, unfortunately, Ubisoft, Activision, and it's not good. It's not. I mean, we're starting to develop a bad rep. Maybe not necessarily. I mean, for overtime, but also other very, very nasty, subjects. But all of this is putting pressure on those who didn't think that people were watching, that they are. So the well-being and the health, besides us, I would call myself like a middle management, right? I'm not a CEO. I'm not making company decisions. I make decisions that affect my team. But a lot of the spotlight is on us now, right? And maybe we have the power to say, no, we're not going to, work the team harder than that, because look what happened last time. Rockstar has lawsuit after lawsuit of overtime and people burning out. Same thing with Blizzard and all these other companies. So now is we have to be really careful, right? It's not like before, where a lot of overtime was, oh, I'm just going to credit you X amount of hours for your overtime. Good luck, bye bye. Or like Paul said, I'm going to buy you a burger. Shut up and do the no. To me, it never flew. I never thought that was enough. Buying people dinner, that's the least you can do. But I think right now there's a lot of eyes on our industry, which are not necessarily for the right reasons. So that's going to push both, the execs and us as developers to really gauge how the team is performing and how each individual person on the team, how they're doing mentally, you know, if they're exhausted or not.
Yeah, if I can jump on board, it's really a hard balance to meet, especially as you start out in the industry. Like you want to show that you're passionate and that you care about what you're doing. And yeah, like I mean, the games industry is really based on people's passion. Like if you're not passionate about what you're doing, there's probably industries out there that you can get a lot more money and get more stable hours. But so yeah, there's that on the one hand, but on the other hand, you really want your work to be valued and you want your time to be respected. So I think for a while the games industry was on one side of that balance of like being at the limit of exploiting their employees to ship out products. And I think the needle is slowly making its way back to a more tolerable, my cat wants to be involved, a more tolerable position on that line. And a lot of like public outcry has sort of like pushed that needle. And hopefully we get to a point where that's not the only thing we hear about the games industry, because there's a lot of like passionate people and a lot of fun involved in working in this industry. But yeah, you need to find managers and people that value your time. And as you're starting out, you just want to get some contact. You just want to show that you can do the job. But like very quickly, that won't be enough. Like you need to find people that you can work with and that value your time. And so it's all on all of us to change the industry, right?
It's an industry that really bridges technical skills and creativity. The passion component is very important, and that's it. Khoury says, "I'm glad you're doing okay." Yeah, okay. So they're surviving. They're still in it. They love it. It's been many years. And where are you guys
Michelle,
headed?
can I also say that, like Paul said, age is such an important part of the industry. When you're starting in the industry, let's be honest, you're a little bit younger, more. I'm not saying we're old. I'm not old, but we're
Nor am
older.
I. Yeah, we're older. Nor am I.
You use the opportunity in the beginning of your career in the games industry to really, that's the time to push, right? Just like when you're studying for an exam, you use that time to study and eventually when you pass your exam, that's it, you fulfilled it, you've proven yourself. I would yeah, like for me right now, I'm married, I have a child. Now is not the time for me to say I'm going to spend an extra amount of hours per night. And not only was the timing right, is that I proved myself already, right? And I continue to prove myself, but I've proven at least enough for me to be able to not have to worry about whether or not I'm doing enough.
So is there something in store for you beyond producer? Joe, Paul, Mark, I mean, where is each one of you headed? Are you happy where you are? Where are you going?
Who's going to answer that one first?
You're gonna go ahead since no, Joe, go ahead since you were the one
well, you know what's cool is that after you're kind of done, again, I don't like the word done, but learning. But now I'm like, okay, I've got all this stuff that I've been kind of accumulating all these years, and I kind of want to give it to people, whatever that is, right? Experience, calmness, confidence, all that kind of stuff that I've been exposed to doing all sorts of projects, working in China, working in the States, working in Canada, and seeing all of that. I'm like in a mode, and at least in my mind now, where I'm like, I'm in like a trainer mode. Like I want to kind of build, I want to help, instead of just like kind of focusing on making games. Yeah, making teams. So this is what kind of after you're done shipping game after game after game, you're like, well, now that I've got this experience, who's interested in learning from it? Who wants it? You know, here, like learn from this situation, or ask me questions about what happened in this situation, because I want to kind of give it away to someone else, you know, if it helps them. That's me.
Mark?
Yeah, at the moment, I really enjoy what I do. Like, I really want I love building things, and so I went back to making games just because I want to build things. I want to like pitch ideas with designers and animators and just like get it in the game. So yeah, I really I at least for another 3 years, which is our current project, that's what I see myself doing. More mentorship, I think, as well. Something I'd like to do. And then yeah, we'll see in 3 years if I'm still interested in what I do. But yeah, there's other options out there. So
Is it too early to ask if you have a preference towards the big company, because you went from huge to small? Is it too early to ask? I know you've been on the project for a few months now.
Yeah, for the moment, I really like the dynamics of small teams. Let's see, how can I be politically correct? So there's
it's
a lot
just a family,
less.
The small team. It's just a family. You don't need to.
There isn't anybody on my team that's untouchable that I can't just stand up and go talk. So I really like that flattening of hierarchies and just being able to talk to anybody. The creative director is sitting right next to the tech director and whatever. So yeah, so I really enjoy that. So and yeah, like big companies are changing, so that might not be so much of a criteria in the future. But when I was at Ubi, there was still a lot of micromanaging from HR of like time off and things like that. And right now, big companies are having a hard time, or at least Ubi was at the time that I left, having a hard time holding on to their senior developers. So that might change in the future. Who knows?
Was there a reason for that? Is it also because they felt the same way you felt?
I think it's a lot of reasons. But from people that I've spoken to, I think there's like a cap. So everyone has their own sort of trajectory working throughout their career, and at a certain moment, if you feel like you're not growing anymore, that's kind of a demotivating factor. And I think a lot of people have hit that point where the big company can take on a lot more juniors, but there isn't enough senior level positions available.
Okay. Paul?
Sorry, I was distracted by some mini emergency at work, which is mostly. Can you remind me of exactly where we're at?
So we were just tying in the landscape where we were headed, and with your personal, personal trajectory. Where are you headed? Are you happy where you are? Because you've been generally, on the same track. What's in your future? What are the last words you can give the students?
My last 2 years have been as a team lead. So it's interesting. I have a lot of I'm curious about all kinds of different stuff, and I want to learn. I want to learn everything basically. And so this kind of role is working with the team and making the kind of, there's many aspects to it, helping to make sure that on one side, your responsibility for the company, making sure that all the work gets done. The other side, responsibility to the employees, making sure that they're happy and doing stuff that's interesting to them, motivated, challenged. So finding that balance is interesting. And I do sometimes miss more technical investigations or something like that. So I think about that from time to time, about whether that's something I want to continue or just shift the way I work a little bit to give myself the opportunity to work on some more technical stuff because I don't want to let that go. But so far, yeah, I mean, I don't see a ginormous shift. I'll still stay within the programming world, but it might be more or less technical or managerial than what I'm doing right now.
Okay, I'm gonna just ask. We're gonna touch base again in the future and see where you're at. I'm just gonna ask the question that Jin had and that René had, and we'll before we say goodbye. So the guys were asking if any of you were available to be mentors, and if not, what is a good way to find a mentor?
Who wants to start? I can start. It's very difficult to be a mentor to someone in Montreal, being 8 hours away. So first thing I would say is try to find someone who's close by. I
Is there a way of delegating to Paul and Mark?
Well, you know what? I did want to throw this out that if there's any other questions, topics, feedback, anything that you need, Michelle, you can always, give the opportunity for your students to send me an email or, reach out. It's maybe not direct mentorship, but it'll be my pleasure to answer based on what I've lived through. But that's another way to get a mentor. Go through QA, jump into a team, and you'll find mentors within the dev team. But if you're not in the team yet, Paul and Marc, maybe you can give them ideas based on how close you guys are to them.
Yeah, I think a lot of in-person stuff has been on hold for a while. I know there's a lot of different meetups and things like that are great to like network and find other people who share your excitement, and also find people who have different people who have different perspectives on in this case video game development. There was a handful of things. One of them that I had gone to was Gang de Dev, but there's a few other ones, like there's ones specifically for Unity, there's ones for I think there's ones for Unreal. So if there's things that are, which is more like networking but also branching out. In terms of mentoring myself, I'm always a little bit wary of too much time commitments, but not no. So yeah.
If anybody has any questions, you can always shoot me an email. You can reach me via Mio or on Teams, and I will be more than happy to forward the questions to Mark, Paul, or Joe. Does that work? Because we're at 12:05, so I don't want to take much of anybody's time. If you can read Nariman's message. Thank you, Joe, Paul, and Mark, for sharing your experience and your advice. It's much appreciated. It is past 12, so we need to step away. Actually, I think Nariman is stepping away.
My pleasure.
I just want to read what Yannick wrote. For a purely Unity and C# development with nothing more than an AEC in general programming and a DESS in game design and a bachelor in psychology, yes, that's true, they are different fields, and not sure it would help. I have about 5 to 6 years experience in Unity. Okay, you know what? We're going to take this, and I'm going to take it to them, Yannick, unless you have a very specific question, because I don't see a question in the chat. So if you have a very specific question, I'll invite you to ask it on audio before we say goodbye. If Urum can give you the, how can I get an entry-level job?
Just raise your hands so I can give you.
Hustle, Yannick, hustle. Hustle at bars,
man. Yannick has created his own game, and it's very, very impressive. But I mean, you know what? I'm going to put you in touch with them, and you can share with them your game, which we've all seen, and you can get a little bit more targeted advice. How does that sound?
Yeah, that would be nice. Thanks.
Okay, so not to keep anybody
tonight
any longer, is it? Okay, well, good luck. Okay, Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Paul, Mark, Joe. Thank you, Int, for making it possible. And thank you very much for all the audience and for your questions and your engagement. Like I said, if there's anybody who needs to connect with the speakers, please send me a message, and I will be happy to forward on your needs. Okay.
Nice to meet you guys all.
Thanks.
Good to chat with you all.
Bye.
Good to see you guys. Thank you. Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you, Urum.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Miss. It was really nice. Thank you so much.
No problem. I guess we can stop the recording.